Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I've got a treat for you, ladies and gentlemen. We've got another one another fantastic coach. So we're doing a bit of a coach series at the moment. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing in people from the world outside adoption to look in and explore some adoption stuff from a kind of like a coaching perspective. So today, delighted to be joined by a fellow Yorkshireman, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, and it's a real joy to be here. It's fantastic. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to talking with you, Simon.
Cool. So one of the things that I saw the other week was around beliefs, right? So I believed a few years ago, right? I believed I was primarily wounded. I believed I was primarily wounded. So I believed that this theory, as set out by Nancy Verrier, it's quite a well-known works in the adoption space. It's been around a book. It's been around 30 years, and there's this idea that there's the separation between a child and his or her mother results in a primal wound. So there's this isolation, this detachment, there's this deep trauma that's and I thought, well, it struck me the other week that this is a belief. I believe that, right? And in the world of, in the coaching world, in the world of psychology and personal development and self-development, all these sorts of words, we talk about beliefs, and we talk about limiting beliefs, and we talk about us becoming kind of these imprisoning us to a certain degree. We're held back by these limiting beliefs, and I thought that was an interesting jumping off point to look at adoption trauma. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Simon, a belief is a thought, but it's a very sticky thought. It's a sort of reinforced thought. It's an habitual thought. It's something that we've thought a lot of times, and we as human beings, it seems to me, tend to think in an habitual way, often without realizing it, often without knowing it, and to kind of release it, it needs to be bring into the conscious awareness. And when we can see it for what it is, when we can bring it into conscious awareness, then we're then getting into the realms of having a choice around, rather than it just sneaking under the radar as being the way we think. When we can see it for what it is, that it's thought, then yeah, we're then into the realms of how much that thought serves us, how much that thought does for us, and then we're into the possibility of seeing that it's not truth, that it's it's not truth. It's just a thought that looks real to us.
Yeah. Something that occurred to me last week is this word mindset, right? We use this word mindset. We don't separate out. We don't separate out as mindset. We just call it mindset. And mindset's everything. And mindset's the reason that we're not achieving what we want in life. Mindset is the panacea for all world. For everything that's going wrong. If I can just change my mindset, then I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay in my personal life. I'm going to be okay in my business life. And it's mindset, right? And I went on, I thought the word set popped into my head when you said the word sticky. like a sticky thought. Sticky and set seem to be quite similarish kind of things to me, quite similar conditions of a material, you know. So you think, well, my life, I'm in, you know, like we talk about, you know, it's like wading through treacle, you know, and that's the stickiness. Or, you know, we would be wading through concrete that is on its way to setting. You know, we've got quick set concrete, which, you know, we better not wade into that stuff because it's going to set, and we're going to be in there, you know, in our wellies or in the whatever, and we're going to be absolutely. So sticky and set. And I thought, well, wouldn't a better option be, I don't want to be mind set. I don't want to set mind. I don't want my mind to be set on things. I'd rather be mind fluid. So I went on to GoDaddy, right, to see how much mindfluid.com would be to buy, just in case, you know, right? And it's $3,500.
Right.
So I didn't buy it, right? I didn't buy it. And then I thought, well, what if there's a little hyphen between it? Mind-set.com. And that was, I think that was 17 quid, 17 pounds. So I thought, well, maybe I would kind of go for that one as a kind of in case I ever came up with an idea that was around mindset. So it is sticky. You know, our beliefs are sticky. And you also talked about them being habitual. And you also mentioned that we're often not aware of them, right?
Absolutely.
So what have you seen? You talked about bringing them into the light of consciousness. It kind of almost seems too easy for me with this sort of stuff. Like I've had those insights, I've had those breakthrough moments, I've had those light bulb moments, epiphanies, epiphanettes, whatever you call them, a new insight. I've seen it something differently.
Yeah.
But what have you seen about the nature of that, the impact of bringing this stuff into the light?
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is the nature of thought, Simon, and we tend to, so, you know, counseling, for example, therapy, for example, tends to get stuck in the content of thought, and when we have a better understanding about how the mind works, then often that's all we actually need to see, that any thought is available to us. All we have to do is notice. And I guess it's part of that journey is seeing that our experience of life is created through thought, not through circumstances. So you were talking about the trauma of children in early life who've gone through traumatic situations. And this has to be done very sensitively. But when people can see in a sensitive way that moment by moment we're creating our experience of life, whatever trauma we've experienced in childhood or in any time of life, it seems to me that we can only actually experience it when we're thinking about it.
But if there's alarm bells ringing off all everywhere, if I'm going to put myself in the mind of a listener listening to this, right? So I'm totally with you, but I'm thinking the alarm bells are going. So what we're actually saying, what you're saying, Peter, is, you know, like we're creating this, so it's our fault. Is that what you're saying?
Oh God, no, not at all, Simon. And that's why it's a very difficult subject to talk about, because
it has to be talked about in a very sensitive kind of way. So we are not saying that whatsoever. What we're saying is that anything in life happens. So a circumstance happens, but we experience it through our thinking. But there's no, what really helps, and what we're looking at doing is helping people. You know, we're absolutely not about saying this is your fault, or if you change something, you blah 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 blah. This is around really, we help people by listening to people, by really understanding people, by really connecting with people. And then from that space, we can gently help them see that any thought is available to us. And whilst we're stuck in a thought pattern, then it's very difficult to move on from that thought pattern. But when we can see that actually a higher quality of thought is available, but without judgment for not easily being able to find that higher quality of thought, because that higher quality of thought is really, or can be really, difficult to find. So we're talking about being able to move on from past experience by finding a different way to see it, I guess. Simon, is that making sense? I absolutely reckon it's a really sensitive subject to talk about, and in something like this, when you're sitting with someone and talking to someone who's experienced trauma, it's much easier to talk about it from a connected, a human to human point of view, rather than me sitting here on a podcast saying, oh well, if you do this you'll be okay, if you do that you'll be okay. No, it comes from a place of connection, of listening, of being heard, and from that space we can start to see things differently, and that is the only way in which we will be able to move past, be able to experience life in a nicer way, if you like, not needing to be trapped by what's happened in the past. Is how I would put it. Is that
yeah, it does.
I
think it's a delightful way of seeing it, and it's a release, and there's a gentleness and there's a compassion here. And I guess what we're really talking about here is, as adults, you and me, we're talking about this from, we're having a conversation about perhaps some trauma that's been being relived now, but it stems from early childhood stuff. We're definitely not saying that this sort of conversation is the conversation that we're going to have with a 6-year-old kid. Definitely not. No. We're talking. No. We're looking at here. We're looking at an episode that's perhaps more relevant to adult adoptees than adopted parents. If we're talking about this in the sense that we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. And the first point of all this, it seems to me, Simon, is about being heard. It's about, we're talking about creating a space where someone who's gone through trauma can be heard. And that's the first That's the first point. And needs to be ready to move forward in some kind of way, whatever that looks like.
And they are, because they're listening. They've got this far into the podcast, so they're listening. And and I started this conversation by saying that I felt this. I felt wounded. Now, there's degrees of wounds, aren't there? Clearly, there's degrees of wounds. So if we are in ER in the States, so did you ever used to watch that with the program set in Chicago?
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
So ER is emergency room. If you're listening in the UK, and accident A&E is the equivalent here in the UK. So people go into A&E with all sorts of wounds, all sorts of different things. So you can be, there's degrees of wound, there's degrees of cut. Now, my own primal wound felt very it didn't feel like it was life or death. And looking back on, so I had it easy compared to, and looking at some of the wounds that are evident amongst the adult adoptees, especially on Facebook, their wounds seem to be more severe. They seem to be deeper. And so I guess the sense I'm getting from this is that because I felt wounded, but not like it was life or death, I'm aware that other people wounds are deeper and more severe. I don't want to minimize anybody's wounds. It's one of those. Is it a wound that we just going to put a stick, a band-aid, a plaster on it, or are we going to need 30 stitches? There's different, there's that emotional wound that we're talking about here that comes in different severity.
It does, absolutely. But the secret is always, and again, I don't want to minimize this, but the secret is always around finding a different level of consciousness, around being able to see ourselves and life as a more loving experience. And I realized, to say that to someone who's experienced a traumatic childhood, who am I to say that, almost? But I know that the secret is to be able to find a different way of seeing the world, and that's about insight. That's about seeing that there's something beyond how we identify, that we are all part of this incredible universe that is love, that's ever changing, that nothing ever stands still, that wherever we are, there is always a way forward. And we need to, the secret is finding that new thought, that new thinking, be it being able to find compassion for example, for our perpetrators. And again, very different, not a conversation you'd be having probably with a 6-year-old kid, but that is where release is going to ultimately come from. And it's how we find that. And for me, the secret there, Simon, is about seeing that we all run our lives from our thought created reality. And I don't have trauma to deal with from childhood, but certainly what's helped me is seeing that my parents were doing their best.
Yeah.
The best they could with the thinking that they had. And they brought things forward from their childhood, blah, 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 blah. As it happens, my dad was adopted, actually, and never told me. I found out a different way, but that's probably a different story. But that's when we can somehow find compassion from anger. Then that's what changes the game.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, well, I thought, wow, about your dad. I thought about some stuff that you shared with me last time, and about some stuff that had gone on for you as when you're in your teens, not trauma, but other stuff that, but I think the biggest thing that came for me is the word you used, the word find.
Yeah.
And I think we're all kind of like, not all, but we're quite active, aren't we? We're looking to find it, looking to find it, and it quite almost this is about being empowered. Okay, I'm going to find this, and I think sometimes when we're seeking that hard, I think myself, when I'm seeking that hard, isn't when I find it stuff.
No.
It's like waiting. It's like waiting for the kettle to boil, isn't it? People say a boil. A watch kettle never boils. So there's a kind of like a grabbing onto this. I've got to find something here. And the story that popped into my head as you were talking was not finding, right? So what's the opposite? I'm sure you've come across Wayne Dyer at some point in your little journey.
Do you know, Simon, I was thinking about Wayne Dyer. That is incredible. I was thinking about the story with him and his father. I don't know if that's what you're about to say, but
exactly. So you share it then. You go for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you may say it more eloquently than me, but my memory is that Wayne Dyer found forgiveness for his father. Was it just before or just after he died? I remember him being at his grave, feeling forgiveness, feeling compassion.
So yes, spot on. And the turnaround on this is he didn't go to the grave to find forgiveness. He went on the grave to pee on it.
Yeah, right.
Went on the grave to pee on it. And he went there and he stood there. And there's a long story about a series of circumstances. And he ranted at his father for 2 hours. He never actually peed on the grave, but something came to him.
Yeah.
And that something was forgiveness. He wasn't looking for it. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking whatever, the opposite. He
revenge,
was seeking
revenge.
Seeking revenge. He was seeking, he was letting everything out. So he wasn't, and he found he had the forgiveness when he wasn't looking for it. And you know, that. So the thing that's popping into my head is you know, perhaps the most meaningful week of my life started by the guy who was leading the course saying, this week is going to, we're looking for a distinct lack of effort this week.
Right.
Because when we're efforting stuff, when we're fighting stuff, when we're seeking stuff, then we don't find it. The art of seeking actually reinforces the lostness that we feel.
Absolutely. And I think tying in with that, Simon, is that any change starts from acceptance. That we use up so much wisdom fighting acceptance that when we can accept, then we open wisdom up to help us in a much more resourceful way. And I think tied in with that, so we're talking about forgiveness and compassion. And I hear this, you know, I've had terrible things happen to me as a child. How can I forgive? How can I show compassion? Well, the thing to see is it's for us, not for them. And we can never move forward until there's a degree of acceptance.
Yeah.
And from acceptance, I think comes an insight that we're going to hold that trauma inside us until we can find a higher level of thinking, which is around compassion, which is around moving towards forgiveness. Now, this is a journey.
Can I go back to Wayne Dyer again?
Yeah, please do, Simon. Yeah,
because piggybacking on what you just said, Dan, I'm thinking that Wayne Dyer stood on that grave. He'd expended all his energy, vented all his energy and his frustration, his fury and his venom, all that sort of stuff, towards his dad. And when he was spent, that's when acceptance came to him. He didn't think, oh, I'm going to look for acceptance. It came to him because he was all gone. He was gone. And I guess the other thing which I've forgotten to say is that the reason that Wayne Dyer was so angry about his dad was due to his dad having left him and his mum and his siblings to fend for themselves. He'd abandoned them. So there is, you know, this isn't adoption, but we're talking about anger to other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, he wasn't looking for acceptance. He was you know, probably emotionally drained, and then the acceptance occurred to him. And the other thing is what happened. Is the really important thing is what happened for him after that. Because
absolutely.
he says that his life took off after that. So unburdened, no longer burdened by his anger towards his venom and his fury towards his father. His shoulders lifted, and he went into the world. He said things took off from that point because he was no longer burdened by the past.
Absolutely. And that's the formless affecting the form, if you like. I met Wayne Dyer. I had the absolute privilege of meeting him. I went to see him speak in New York, and I actually, the stories I went to see him speak in Washington, DC, I was so impacted. I read The Power of Intention, was so impacted by it. Got to see this guy. So I went to see him. He had sciatica, so he couldn't turn up. So I thought, never mind, I'm going to come back another time. So I then saw him in New York, and I had a brief conversation with him, and what just struck you was a level of peace that I'd never experienced before. He just held a level of peace, an incredible level of peace, which, as you quite rightly said, I love what you said. I love everything about what you said there, Simon. He couldn't possibly have found that level of peace whilst he was still harboring anger and lots of negative feelings. But absolutely right that he didn't go looking for it. It found him, and I think that's right. And it's about it's. I think the starting point is just seeing that there's something else, that there's something else that's possible, and that probably does mean going through it. You know, that's what I meant by being listened to, being heard, telling your story, if you like, but then seeing beyond, being able to go beyond the story, being able to, this is it, this is what happened, this is what created these feelings which are awful, and then from that space we can find something new, we can find wisdom, we can find something to guide us in a different way, Simon. And can I also say that I've thought a lot about the people in Ukraine, you know, and what's happening there at the moment, and I can only think that, again, around acceptance, is around seeing that this is our journey in life, and we all have completely different journeys in life, and it's seeing that's my journey, that's my journey.
Yeah,
and there's a real peace in that. It seems to me, possibly the opposite of that is comparatitis with other people, but I'm not sure that's complete opposite, but there's something there about it's your journey. Some people are going to live long lives, some people are going to live short lives, some people are going to live this life, some people are going to live that life, and that's an acceptance of what is.
Yeah. Well, there's so much in there. I'm not quite sure where to go next. I think I've just go back to, I go back a step on something that occurred to me. So I found Wayne Dyer later, you know, like the first stuff I started listening to Wayne Dyer was far more peaceful. But the stuff, I then went back to the start and I read one of his first books, and I found it very, very psychological, very empowered, very like it's your fault stuff, and so something must, you know, whether it was this thing with his dad or not, but he went at this stuff when he first started in the 60s. He went at it like hammer and tongue, like a machine, and then, but his stuff at the end of his life was, and you know how he was towards the end of his life, as expressed by you, this peaceful guy. There's something big there as a for me, as a kind of a shift that happened in him, that happened in me, I think, and maybe that happened in you. You go from this kind of like empowerment to acceptance. It's kind of like
yeah, for sure.
No, the other stuff in terms of the Ukraine stuff, the thing that popped into my head was how long well, let's not get into politics of it. I'll skip the politics. Have you heard of a Holocaust survivor called Edith Eger? Eger, E-G-E-R. Have you heard of her?
I've heard the name, but I know nothing about it. I've read Man's Search for Meaning,
So her book is, well, her story is similar to Viktor Frankl's story. The book's a lot longer. For me, the thing that stood out, I've just finished it a couple of months ago. The thing that stood out for me was she suffered more emotionally, she suffered more after the Holocaust than during it. She suffered more after the prison camp than she did in the concentration camp.
That doesn't surprise me at all. For me, that illustrates the difference between presence and thinking, Simon. And going back to what we're talking about, when we're in the thick of things, we're present to, we will do what occurs to us. We do what we need to do. But when we're caught up in thinking, which generally happens afterwards, or can happen before as well. So if we've got warning that something's going to happen, something terrible is going to happen, then we experience it in a very different way to if it just happens, bang, done. And then we tend to walk away, and then we get caught up in thoughts. We tend to, oh, God, what if? We get caught up in a pile of what ifs, and it's that thinking that is the issue, rather than what happens in a moment. Ukraine, we have no idea how we would react if we were in the shoes of a Ukrainian in a bad situation at the moment. We've no idea. But what I do know, Simon, is that experience tells me, and having worked with a lot of people tells me, as human beings, we are fantastic with dealing what's present, what's happening in the moment. We are resourceful. We are connected to spirit. Spirit guides us in the moment. But what we're hopeless at doing is dealing with the past and dealing with the future. Because it doesn't exist in anything but thought.
Indeed.
Now there's something about trauma. I before, if you'd have talked to me 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I would have said, well, trauma doesn't exist in anything but thought. I'm open to being persuaded that there's something that it exists in our body somehow, but I'm still a little bit, well, cut a body open and show me where trauma is in the body. I'm a little bit that, I'd say I'm open to be persuaded differently, but it seems to me that we're only experiencing trauma when we're thinking about trauma. Now that may be consciously, it may be subconsciously, but
well, that was beautiful and eloquent, wasn't it? Well, the one of the seminal works in this area is called The Body. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. So I don't. It's kind of beyond my pay grade. I look for simplicity here, and the simplicity my simplicity often sounds like denial to some people who are who are wed, who are stuck in this trauma. And it would do if I was, and it did do when I was too, right? So I'm not as far as I can tell, if we were to look at the primal wound, so I'm 55. I was adopted 55 years ago. if you say, well, that trauma was that trauma is a historic past event. My mood and my level of security and my level of love for myself and my fellow human beings has been up and down a lot in those 55 years. I would say, well, how can a fixed event be responsible for a variable experience? I gave up maths. I gave up maths when I was 16. I didn't do maths any further on. But even I know from that, like if we looked at it as an equation, a fixed input like this event of being cannot cause a variable experience.
Yeah.
So there's something else causing it. Yeah. It can't be the event. And in your words, it's thought. And you've also used the kind of, I think you've used the word level of consciousness as well at some point during the conversation. I believe that our level of consciousness or it's just a posh way of saying thought. I believe that I think we're as one on that, that's what's causing our experience.
Yeah.
We're reliving the past. We're reliving the past.
Yeah.
But we don't relive it all the time. And there's the hope, right? There's the hope. Because
absolutely,
I'm not traumatized when I'm not thinking about it. So it's something about my thinking. And what we're not saying is, as Wayne Dyer would have said, I think one of his early books was Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, wasn't it? Somebody's written this book, Change Your Thinking. So this is this empowered, Butch, Simon or Peter going out, and we're going to go out and we're going to change our thinking. We're going to go into our heads and we're going to change our thinking, and we're going to make everything's going to be all right if only we can change our thinking. And we've already said that that's not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's for me, Simon, it's the relationship between the spiritual and the psychological. It's we have some control, it seems to me, over where our thinking goes, but we certainly don't have the ultimate control over that. Thought pops into our head from nowhere, and like you said, from Wayne Dyer, something popped into his head and changed the game. And now when I talk about consciousness, I think what I mean is around our connection to spirit, our connection to the universe, our connection to God, if you like, our connection to this universal intelligence, this same intelligence that makes trees grow leaves and dispense with them and grow some more and blah blah blah. That the more connected we are to that, which is when we're not caught up in a pile of our repetitive thinking, that's original thought, if you like. I think the Bible talks about original thought, doesn't it? That's that new idea that pops along from nowhere, that everything comes from nothing, and when we hang around in this space of nothingness, then new things come up. So in the case of trauma, when our mind's quietened, we can see a new way forward. We don't know when, But it's that.
So how would you, if this primal wound, as I've expounded it to you, how would you see that with relation to what you just said? I mean, the spiritual and the psychological. How would you see the primal wound from that context, from a spiritual and a psychological context?
Well, for me, Simon, and I'm kind of qualifying this by saying that it doesn't seem to me I've gone through great trauma. Okay, so I'm qualifying it from that. But from what I understand of human beings, the wonderful news is that it's variable. That people who go through the same traumatic event have very different experiences of it. And the two opposite ends of the pole can be that event is going to define me for the rest of my life, as opposed to the opposite side of the pole is there's great learnings in that from me that I can take and move my life forward. They're two opposites of the pole. And there's no judgment on here as to whichever side someone is in that pole, or wherever they are in the middle of those. But those seem to me like the two extremes. And we experience it through our thinking. I can't see that we can experience it any other way, or through our thinking and our consciousness. It seems to me that we can't experience it when we're asleep. Maybe we can as dreams, I don't know. But no one is ever experiencing the same experience 24/7. Someone who's been deeply traumatized in childhood isn't experiencing that 24/7. I've yet to meet a human being that doesn't experience some moments of joy. It may be brief moments of joy. Viktor Franklin experienced brief moments of joy. The guys in the Ukraine will experience brief moments of joy, maybe when they're hugging their partner or something like that. So I can't see how it can come from anywhere but within, and that's wonderful news, because there's always scope for us seeing something new, for us finding something new that changes our experience. So we can't change what's happened, but what's happened is brought forward in thought, which you said earlier. It's brought forward in thought. It's brought forward in memory. So we're not changing the event, but the event doesn't exist. It exists in thought and memory, and that's up for grabs. That is completely up for grabs. How we remember that and the meaning that we attach to that is completely up for grabs.
The metaphor that popped into my head was and it is used a lot, but I'm going to use it specifically from the spiritual and psychological perspective. So some days the sky is just black with rain clouds. Okay. That's the primal wound. That's the psychological trauma. And then sooner or later there's a little break in the cloud, and we can see a bit bit of blue sky. And that's the kind of the spiritual essence of that's the spiritual essence of who we are. And that's where the hope is.
Absolutely.
The hope is with the hope is in the blue sky. But if all we can see are these black rain clouds, then we're not going to believe that there is any hope whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and the next metaphor comes on, and it's one of my favorites, and it's on this same thing, right? So if we look at our psychology, our thoughts and our feelings, that's where all the trauma exists. It all exists in that. This is a Michael Neill metaphor. So listeners, Peter and I met through a guy called Michael Neill, a mentor. So that's the pile of poop. And in the pile of poop, there is a diamond. And that diamond is the essence of who we are. And we're identified as human beings. Most of us, most of the time, are identified with the crappy thoughts and feelings in our head, rather than the diamond essence of who we truly are.
Yeah.
And the thing about diamonds is they're the toughest substance known to, one of the toughest substances on this planet. And you can't actually wound a diamond. You can't scratch it. You need glass or something. It's almost impossible to and this is when the metaphor runs out, right? Because what my take on it is that we are all fundamentally unwoundable, because the spirit, the truth of who we are, cannot be wounded. It's not a thing that can be wounded. It's not a diamond that can be scratched. Okay, diamonds can be scratched, but that's where the metaphor kind of runs out.
Yeah.
And look, we're all so, me included, right? We're all so caught up in our thoughts and our feelings, stuck, and we're stuck in our mindset. We're stuck in that syrup that we were talking about earlier on, that concrete, that fast set concrete. We're all stuck in that, and we lose sight of the diamond that's hidden within the diamond of who we truly are. So,
yeah, perfect. And all we need to do, for me, my experience, Simon, is that all I need to do is just get a glimpse that there's a space of no thought. And I spend short periods of time in that space. And when I do, I just find complete peace. And that, it seems to me, is available to everyone when we can. Well, I think the starting point is knowing that space exists. That seems to me, I didn't know that space existed a few years ago. And when I know that there is a space that I can go to, whatever's going on in my life, whatever's going on in the world, that space is always available. That's it.
So all we're doing, listeners, and me too, right, Peter? I mean, all we're doing is we're pointing you to that space, that gap in the cloud. And even if there is no gap in the cloud now,
yeah,
it always goes sooner or later. Like even in rainy Yorkshire, right? Even in rainy Yorkshire, sooner or later there is a gap in the cloud, and the They call them depressions, don't they? If I remember my O-level geography right, they call a weather front is a depression. Sooner or later, the depression goes if it's a low pressure.
Absolutely. And I go back to what we spoke about earlier, Simon, that you can't be present to presence and present to thinking at the same time. And that is exactly why the lady Edith, I can't remember her name, in the Holocaust, why when she was present to what she needed to do, she was fine. When she wasn't, was when she was present to thinking afterwards. And that's it. So it's quite often not the event that creates that feeling and thought. It's after the event, when we're caught up in thinking. So just carrying on from what we said there around. So therefore, it's not about, I don't know, needing to meditate, needing to get out in the woods or whatever. It's being present to something, and when we're present to something, then we drop out of thinking. It may be dancing, or it may be music, or it may be our family, or it may be our children, or it may be work. Just being present to something allows us to drop out of our thinking, because we can't be in both places at the same time.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You've talked about the future and the past. We've talked a lot about the past. One of the stories that had popped into my head, I was talking to somebody who's saying there was an aspect of his life that he didn't like. And I said, well, it's a bit like flying, isn't it? That somebody's scared of flying. That they're scared about flying before they get on the plane. So it ain't the plane, it's the thinking. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could, it's something I've said before, is that if you could fall from 20,000 feet without any thought, you would have a fantastic journey. But of course, your thought would be going to what's going to happen when you hit the floor. Because thought creates everything. If we could go 20,000 feet without a parachute, we'd have a wonderful journey. But the bit we'd be thinking about what happens at the end of it, which wouldn't be so nice. That's going to spoil it for us. That's exactly the same thing.
And people do that though. Skydivers do that because they know they've got their chute, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But that space of no thought is the Holy Grail. And this understanding has helped me so much to see that, to spend much more of my life with a quieter mind. And sometimes in no thought, catching, sometimes I just can't, I've got nothing on my mind at all. Oh, this is nice. And when we're aware that space exists, it changes again.
Beautiful, Peter. So where can people find out more about you? You want to get in touch?
Yeah, I'm quite active on Facebook, which is my name, Peter Sleigh. So I share quite a lot of my insights as things come to me. I share it. I shared something from the missing link this morning, actually, which hit me. I had some insight reading that. And my website is businessandpersonalcoach.co.uk.
So we'll put links into the show notes, listeners, so you can check out Peter. And Peter just name checked he mentioned this book, The Missing Link. So The Missing Link was written by a Scottish adoptee.
He was indeed, yeah. You're right.
called Sydney Banks, and I have the same initials as Sydney Banks. Isn't that a bit spooky, right? So yeah, that's he's the. Yeah, he's unfortunately he's no longer with us. But if you Google Sydney Banks, Sydney with a Y, you find all sorts of great stuff, and including the missing link. So, Peter, this has been brilliant, my friend. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
It's been beautiful. A real joy for me as well, Simon. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this. It's been wonderful. Thank you for sharing your insights as well. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks to you, listeners, for listening, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.